So, in your relationship dynamics, you may find that deep down, you're more afraid than you think to communicate openly, honestly about what you need from somebody else. And so you hold back out of fear of pushing the person away if you communicate your needs, or being too much, or being a burden if you're too open and transparent about your fears or desires. But what would somebody with an anxious attachment style say to their partners if they truly could open up about their feelings, fears, and needs? So many individuals with anxious attachment style feel misunderstood, like they're walking on eggshells, not being able to truly express what's going on inside of them, holding it in, and then oftentimes it comes out in a less productive form. So in today's video, we are going to cover 7 honest truths. We're going to talk about if the anxious attachment style were really honest, what major things would they say or share with their partners? And we'll talk about why these are so important. And maybe you can even share this with a loved one so that they have some more insight into what's going on and can make you feel more loved and considered as a result. So here's the very first thing, and I think this is where most people get it really wrong. A lot of people think anxious attachment styles need constant reassurance. But the reality is, if you just give reassurance consistently, the anxious attachment style will not need it constantly. And there's a big difference. Consistently means like say something reassuring once a day. That consistency will be enough to give the anxious attachment style certainty so that they can feel like, okay, I can rest in this relationship. But because once a day seems like that's a little bit more than maybe a dismissive avoidant, for example, would need. A lot of people are like, oh no, they need so much reassurance. The more I give it, they're just going to be this bucket with a hole in the bottom that I can never fill. But that couldn't be further from the truth. So one of the first things an anxious attachment style would say, if they were honest, is I need consistent reassurance, not constant reassurance. And actually, if there's some consistency in the reassurance over time, like words of affirmation, a compliment, saying you're happy with where this is going, or you're interested in me, or excited to spend time with me, if there's just something once a day or so, or at least on a more regular basis, I'll actually be able to rest assured that I can trust in this relationship unfolding and growing, and I won't be needy or clingy. Second major thing that anxious attachment styles would say, if they were being honest, is if you don't respond, my mind absolutely spirals. Okay, this is important for partners to know. And of course, it's important for the anxious attachment style to work on this because you want to make sure that you are in the space where you can self soothe. The last thing I want to tell anybody to do is, oh, yeah, just pretend like it's fine. Just suppress that you feel really petrified and scared of somebody leaving when they don't get back to you. Suppressing will never work. Self soothing is the solution. And self soothing happens. We talk a lot about this on this channel, but self soothing actually happens when you learn what your needs are and how to meet them in the relationship to yourself consistently enough that your subconscious mind gets conditioned to be like, oh, I can rely on myself. It does feel good to meet these things in the relationship to myself. And research shows it takes about 21 days to habituate that so that you don't feel so anxious when somebody pulls away. And there's a lot of ways you can kind of speed up that process through different reconditioning techniques. Again, we talk so much about that on this channel. I'm not going to get into it in this video in particular, but an anxious attachment style, if they could share openly, they would say, I get really scared. I get really concerned and worried when I don't hear from you. And what's the solution? Anxious attachment style should work on self soothing, but you should also be able to request from your partner, hey, here are my boundaries. Here are my standards. We don't need to text back and forth all day, every day. But if we're in a relationship together, you definitely can't go missing for a day or two at a time. And that's a healthy, secure standard, by the way. I think if you're in a secure relationship with somebody, there's definitely daily conversation and communication. Maybe we have room or flexibility for somebody to, when they're overwhelmed, communicate a little less on certain days. But generally, what we see in a lot of secure relationships as that standard are number one, communication in the morning. Good morning. How is your, I hope you have a great day. A little text exchange back and forth. Maybe another little communication at lunchtime. Also, maybe not. And then some sort of exchange in the evening, a quick phone call on your way home from work, or, obviously seeing each other a couple times a week, 2, 3 times a week tends to be a good average if you're in that earlier dating stage before living together. And those are the things that are healthy. So, letting your partner know that if they do need space or they do have a busy day, to preface that in advance. Hey, I love you, honey. I'm just going to be really busy today if I'm not around as much as usual. That can also be a fantastic solution to help bridge the gap. And again, help the anxious attachment style feel more assured. Next one. I overanalyze everything you say and do. This is definitely something our dear anxious attachment styles can really, really struggle with, especially as it relates to abandonment. They'll often overanalyze the interactions, how they went, how the anxious attachment style feels like they showed up. Were they good enough? Were they worthy enough of love? Did you have a good enough time? And they'll find themselves really overanalyzing the conversations. Again, this is something that will be so valuable and useful for you to work on if you're an anxious attachment style by learning to self soothe, meet your own needs. It will help lessen that intensity of that panic and that concern, which is such an uncomfortable situation to be in and such an uncomfortable thing to feel. And a great way out of this, instead of over analyzing everything all the time, is just to have a weekly conversation or so about, hey, how are you feeling about the relationship? Are your needs being met? Are there things we could improve upon? Like just have a weekly or bi-weekly touch base at a really high level about that so that you get your certainty, because when you're over analyzing, you're actually looking for certainty. And it just feels like there's this nice, healthy checkpoint that, again, a lot of secure individuals tend to do naturally in their relationships. They check in with each other. That's healthy. It gives certainty, but it also gives room and space for valuable feedback for how we can grow together instead of growing apart. Number 4, I sometimes pretend that I'm fine when I'm really hurt. This is something I think is so important for anxious attachment styles to recognize that they do. They sometimes avoid conflict because they think conflict could lead to a breakup or a pulling apart or some sort of detriment in the relationship. And avoiding will never solve problems. It will only allow them to fester. So rather than avoiding, a much better solution is to instead get good at communicating when you feel hurt, just in a healthier way. So rather than holding in, and then it kind of comes out with like, I'm so upset about this. And it can come up from this really emotional space that somebody with a different attachment style may receive more as like emotional dumping, like you're telling me everything at once. A much better solution, and this is something securely attached people do well, is when you're feeling stressed, say something in real time, but use positive framing. So for example, when you hold things in, and let's say the thing that you're holding in is that your partner's not spending enough time with you, and you hold it in, you don't want to be a burden, you don't want to say too much. And then eventually it comes out and you're like, hey, I feel like you don't care about me, you never want to spend time with me, you're not talking to me. That can feel like it's really intense for somebody who's less emotional, or it can feel like, hey, you're saying never, or you're using, intense language, like you're it almost can be received as blaming from somebody else, even if that's not at all your relationship to it or what you're intending. But if instead, when you feel like somebody's pulling away and you need more time, instead of saying, nothing and then holding it in and then talking about it all at once after a couple of weeks or a few weeks of feeling like that, say it in real time. Say, hey, I'm feeling a little disconnected this week. Let's plan something fun to do on the weekend. And that way you're talking about a solution for it rather than focusing on the emotions of the problem. And that's where a lot of other attachment styles may feel like they struggle. Like, oh, are you blaming me? They can take it personally. That's something for them to work on too. Don't get me wrong. But when you practice positive framing, you are much more likely to get seen and heard. And then you end the cycle of self silencing and pretending like everything's fine when you may not actually feel like that. Number 5, you may say to somebody, if you were being really honest, I'm worried that if I'm not perfect, you won't want me anymore. And this is something that is so painful to feel if you're an anxious attachment style. If you are constantly putting all of this pressure on yourself to be perfect, especially if you have a core wound of fearing that I'm not good enough or I'll be unloved, that is going to feel you leaving more alone than you may even realize. And in fact, when we constantly put this pressure on ourselves to be perfect, to be worthy of love, there's this inherent abandonment of our own authenticity in relationships, which the more we abandon ourselves, the more we will fear being abandoned by others. Because the more we abandon ourselves, we already feel alone. So imagine somebody else does that back to me. That can be excruciating. So a huge thing to work on there is actually being in a space where you can share this with your partner. I think it's a beautiful thing to share vulnerably, to ask for reassurance, but also, like we talk so much about on this channel, to do the work to reprogram your core wounds so that you're not coming from this constant space of fearing abandonment, fearing not being good enough or unloved or unworthy, or so many other painful wounds that anxious attachment styles tend to carry, like fear of rejection or exclusion. And I will put a link below to a course fully for free before I go into the next couple of pieces here that an anxious attachment style would say. A course fully for free. We still have 2 left to cover, all about how to reprogram core wounds. And it's the anxious attachment style rewiring course, reprogramming course, and will actually help you learn the neuroscience of neuroplasticity and how to actually change our conditioning, because you're not born with these wounds. They get conditioned into you and you can change them. It's not even hard to do. It's so easy to do. You just need the right tools and a tiny, tiny bit of consistency. So that brings me to the next point. A lot of anxious attachment styles, if they were being honest, would also say, I sometimes feel unseen and unheard in the relationship, and it would mean so much to me if you could be a little bit more present. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, anxious attachment styles are so focused on their partners. They're so focused on being there for the people in their life, not just partners, friends, family, everybody. They want to make people around them feel seen and like they matter and like they're special. But sometimes anxious attachment styles get so fixated on doing that for others that they forget to give any of that to themselves. And so they starve for it. They hunger for this idea that, hey, somebody could make me feel like that too, want to think about me and my needs and make me feel special. And a lot of that comes with 2 main things: thoughtfulness and a little bit more presence. And I don't mean gifts, I mean like the ability to be present with somebody else, to be attuned. And when you are able to do that, anxious attachment styles feel so deeply seen and loved, and they feel like they matter in a relationship, the way they're always trying to make other people feel like they matter. And again, this doesn't have to be something that's all the time for hours and hours. Quality here is so much more important than quantity. So if you were able to make an anxious attachment style feel seen and heard because you're present with them for, an hour at least every time you hang out 2 or 3 times a week, or have a good routine in the morning if you live with them, to just be present for 15 minutes over a coffee with phones and technology away. Those things will make such a big impact on your relationship. And again, help the anxious attachment style feel settled, feel like they can rest assured, and you'll actually see a huge diminishing of any of those clingy types of behaviors as a result. And the last thing that's very important, if an anxious attachment style were honest, is they would say, you know what? Doing something that makes me feel special, like buying me flowers or writing me a cute little note for 10, 15 seconds, that's 3 sentences long, doing something once every couple of weeks in the relationship, it could be twice a month. That will again help me feel like you care. I will get so much joy from that. And again, you'll start to realize that I don't need all of this reassurance all the time. I just need a little bit of reassurance, a nice line, frequently throughout the week, and a little something that makes me feel special once or twice a month. When you look at that, how quickly how long it takes for you to be able to say, "Hey, I'm glad that we're together," or "Hey, I love where this is going," or "Hey, I'm excited to see you this weekend." To say something like that once a week, or sorry, once a day throughout the week, 4 or 5 days a week, let's say on average, that takes like 3 seconds. And to do something special for an anxious attachment style where you're like bringing them a flower or buying them flowers or writing them a cute little note, or bringing some food over that that they like something like that may take 10 minutes. If it's writing a note, it may take 30 seconds. And those things go such a long way. And again, you will see those things in the relationship with your anxious partner. If you are listening to this as the partner of an anxious attachment style, or the AP yourself, you will see this be something that helps them give you space. They feel reassured, connected in the relationship. They'll be able to relax. And you'll see that both of you have an easier time moving towards more secure patterns of behavior together. And in case you missed it, you can now reserve your spot and get more than a 50% early bird discount for our live relationship coach certification program. Launching October 28th, 2024, this 12-week program gives you the opportunity to build a new career, create your own thriving coaching practice, help your community, and secure your financial future full of abundance with a growing waitlist of clients. And the best part is that you get to spend a whole bunch of time with me as I teach you exclusive subconscious reprogramming tools and help you learn how to change somebody's attachment style from insecurely attached to securely attached so that you can truly help create transformation in people's lives and have a wait list of people waiting to work with you. We also have an entire business week about how to build funnels, systems, and to really build a thriving and busy practice. You can sign up using the link down below the video, and I can't wait to see you there. So if you want to go deeper into that free course, just for a limited time, where you can actually rewire those core wounds, those fears in relationships, if you are the anxious individual listening to this, then I will put the link down below. We have that for all attachment styles, for fearful avoidance, dismissive avoidance. I'll put all of those down below if you're somebody of a different attachment style listening to this. And I am so glad that you stopped by here today. Thank you so much for watching and for being here. And I can't wait to see you in future videos.